which is the best Linux server for a beginner. If you're just getting started into hosting your own websites using VPSs, cloud, and you're trying to figure out which Linux operating system should I use for my server. If you're just starting out, Ubuntu is the best Linux for a beginner. And the reason why I'm saying that is because Ubuntu is one of those operating systems which is widely used. You will never be alone, and that's very important when it comes to hosting your server, especially as a beginner, because at some point you're going to mess up, and if you go online, you're going to find that chances are somebody else already had the problem you're having right now, and you'll find a solution online. So every time you want to use Ubuntu, always make sure that you're using the LTS version. So as a beginner, if you're on a server, always look for the 2204, 2004 LTS versions, okay? As I'm recording this video, the latest Ubuntu LTS version is 2204. LTS just means long-term support. So make sure you're using the long-term support releases of Ubuntu, because this will give you about 5 years of support. So on a server, that's something that's very important, because you don't want to be changing your server every year. So if you have Ubuntu 2204 LTS, you're definitely going to be safe with whatever you're running for the next 5 years. So you can just use the same server, updating the same server for the next 5 years. And even after that, there will be some period for security updates. So you can be certain that with an LTS version, you will always have a reliable Ubuntu version that is not going to keep hopping from one version to another. The next one will probably be 2404. So make sure that on your VPS or on your cloud, you're using 2204. Right now, if whatever you want to run supports 2204. If the system you're trying to run doesn't support 2204, then you can just go to Ubuntu 2004. So when you get your new server, there are certain things that you need to do as a beginner, and make sure that these are things that you do, because if you don't, your server will not be secure. And some of this may seem like they're trivial things, they're not that important, but make sure you do them, because in the end, you want to make sure that your production server is as secure as possible. So some of the things that you need to do when you get your new server, you need to create a new user. Don't use the root user on your server. Make sure you create a new sudo user, and then you disable root user login. You'll set up SSH key login so that you don't have to log in with your key. This one is more convenient. You don't have to type in your password. You just keep your key on your computer, and then you can log in with that when you need to access your server. And then again, you need to disable the root user, disable the root user from logging into the server via SSH. And then you also need to disable password authentication, because you can now access your server using an SSH key. You also need to set up the firewall. Of course, this is important. Set up the firewall. Just click on these links and you'll see everything that is here is on this page. You can change the SSH port. Everybody knows that the default SSH port is port 22. So you need to make sure that your port is different from everybody else's. And then, of course, creating a swap file. This depends on your RAM. If you have more than 6 GB and above, you probably don't need to create a swap file, depending on what you're running. But if you're running big things, then you may need to create a swap file. A swap file is basically a temporary memory, whereby once your server runs out of memory, some applications will be taken into the swap file. If you don't have a swap file and your computer runs out of memory, it's going to crash. So change the server host name. Okay, this is just a formality that you need to do, especially if you want to run a website on your server, you want to send mail, make sure you're changing the server host name. Now, all these things, I've created a video that goes through all these steps, and you don't have to worry. You can just follow along with the video and you will not be lost. Of course, setting the time zone, then set up automatic updates. This is important, especially if you're someone who doesn't want to constantly log into your server to make sure that your server is up to date. You can set up automatic updates. And then I was talking about HTTP. If you want to use a control panel, HTTP is very lightweight. You can use HTTP to run WordPress, PrestaShop, Laravel, Magento, all PHP-based applications. You can run them using HTTP. Even if you have static websites, just HTML and CSS, and you have lots of them, you can run multiple websites using HTTP. And I do have a playlist for that as well. You can find that in my YouTube playlist. If you don't want to use Ubuntu, you can always use Debian. Debian is the father of Ubuntu. So if you don't want to use the child, you can always use the father. And with this post as well, you can set up Debian 11. I did try it from top to bottom using Debian 11. So that's pretty much it for this, and I hope this video has given you some insight on what you should do. I'm not saying that you should start with Ubuntu. All I'm saying is that Ubuntu would be the best path for you. If you want to use anything else, go ahead and use any other Linux server, because there are many to choose from. If you want RHEL-based operating systems, you have Rocky Linux, you have CentOS, you have Alma Linux. There are multiple options you can choose from. So I hope this video has been insightful for you to help you decide which operating system you should use for your server when you're starting out with VPSs.